Welcome. I'd like to call to order the Town Council School Committee. This is a public hearing. It's the initial budget hearing, Monday, December 20th, and the time is 7:10. If we could all stand for the pledge, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to first welcome the school committee members, Superintendent John. I know that this is a very busy time of the year, so we appreciate and welcome. Today, we have the budget adoption process and the charter amendments approved November 7th, 2006. And I'm just going to read, this is initial budget hearing to discuss goals and objectives. So the Town Council shall schedule between December 1st and January 15th of the ensuing year a public hearing for the purpose of discussing and soliciting comments from the electors relating to the general goals and objectives of the budget for the ensuing year. It is recognized that a proposed budget will not be completed at this time. The purpose of the hearing is to receive public input regarding the budget prior to the presentation of a proposed budget by the town manager, without limiting the discussion such matters as any increases in taxes, proposed new projects, contractual obligations, and other items affecting the budget shall be discussed. The school committee shall attend this meeting and participate in this hearing. So according to the adoption process for our charter amendment, this is what brings us here tonight. We will be holding questions at the end for any questions from the public. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Alfred.
As Ella has indicated, the goals to be accomplished tonight, one is to provide general information relative to the budget process. The reading that Council President just went through is specifically out of the charter amendments. The meeting is also to provide documentation relative to the base budget development starting points. And I want to emphasize that we're talking about starting points. Budget is a process. What starts today will be completed approximately on May 1st. And there may be adjustments that will be made subsequent to that based on actions taken at the State House. So what we're trying to do tonight is to start those anchor points, the points of where we will start the process. And as we go through, the budget will mature in terms of the amounts of money that are necessary to meet programs both at the municipal and the school level, as well as the revenues that are available to match those expenditures. Where the programs don't match the expenditures and the income, we will have to look at how do we achieve balance. Balance can be achieved really in two ways. The funding source of last resort is increase in property taxes or reductions in program, both at the municipal and the school level. We're also here to solicit comments from the general public relative to the council and school committee's job as it goes forward in the development of the budget. What we anticipate tonight and what we receive by May 1st or what we see by July 1st there will be changes, some of them subtle, some of them major in terms of what the implications are within each of the expenditure programs. We've run through the charter amendments. They are available on the town's website at southkingstownri.com. Also, copies of this evening's presentations, both from the school and from my office, are also available at that website. Looking specifically at the budget process, This is the flow chart that was developed. I want to run through the dates. Box number 1, the town clerk has completed the advertising of the preliminary budget. Between December 1st and January 15th, we are meeting for that initial budget hearing tonight on December 20th. The school committee will submit to the manager's office on February 14th the school committee's recommended budget, which will be considered for incorporation into the town manager's budget. I want to caution that the town manager's budget, based on the charter requirements, is an effort by the manager to provide a professional recommendation on meeting the services with the revenues that are available. School committee budget will be submitted. There may be revisions on the funding amount that's proposed and included within the manager's budget as far as property tax support. On March 1st, the town manager's budget will be submitted to the council. The council will then, during the month of March, on March 7th, 8th, 9th, review in public work session the various components of the municipal program. The council will then meet in session on March 15th with the school committee for two purposes. One, a review of their budget and a determination on what the needs are, should they exceed the expenditure needs, should they exceed the revenue availability that's forecast within the school program. On March 21st, the council will be vested with responsibility to adopt a preliminary budget. On April 13th and 14th, public hearings will be scheduled to review the council's preliminary budget. On or before April 21st of 2011, qualified electors with 25 signatures will be able to pose questions, to ask for amendments to the council's preliminary budget, either for increases or decreases in the amounts contained within that budget document. On April 25th, the council will consider those petitions and will consider the adoption of a final council recommended budget. On or before May 12th, with the need for 200 qualified elector signatures, request for referendum can be submitted. Should the signatures be found to be in excess of the 200 number, on May 16th, those petitions for referendum would be certified. Should they be certified, there would be a referendum, or really a municipal election, which would be conducted on June 7th of 2011 to consider either adoption of the council's recommended budget as presented, or as it would be amended by any of the petitions that had obtained the necessary signatures. The next chart within the presentation tonight incorporates all of the dates that I've just listed. They also provide the schedule for the capital improvement programs, work sessions, and adoption schedule. Capital budget will begin to be considered by the town council on June 4th and 5th. The council will meet in joint session, work session with the school committee on January 13th to consider the school committee's recommended capital improvement program. And it would also provide the council with an opportunity to get an update on developmental efforts for the school committee's budget for the 2011-2012 year. Each budget session, the issue of the property tax cap in Rhode Island comes forward. This legislative act, which was approved in 2006, provides for a reduction in the maximum amount of tax increase on a yearly basis since 2007 fiscal year. For the 11-12 year, the most that property taxes can increase within the cap limitation is 4.25%. to give you an idea of what that means. The existing tax levy for the 10-11 year is $65,499,000. A 4.25% increase on that would generate $68,287,000. That would be a almost $2.8 million increase over the existing levy. Were that to occur, it would require a property tax rate close to $15, up from the $14.19 that supports the current year budget. Over the last 2 years, and we'll see this in future slides, we've seen tax levy increases of 1.2 and 1.5%. I think that the idea of a tax cap is fine, but I don't think that any budget that we prepare or that should be submitted to the voters should at any time come close to that 4.25% based on the economic conditions that we all face, both in the nation and in the state. We really don't need an emphasis on 30/50, but there is one point. The school committee does have the ability to request up to 4.25% more than what they received in the current year. Again, I don't think that's a realistic expectation in today's economy. The next slide provides property tax distribution over the last 6 years. And again, this, the lower chart on this page presents the property tax levy growth in relation to the tax cap. As you can see, in the 06-07 year, we were at the maximum of the maximum was 5.5%. The levy increase was 5.38. In 7-8, the cap was 5.25, and the town saw a levy increase of 5.25. In the third year of the cap, the 8-9 year, the cap was 5%. We again met the level of the cap at a 5% growth. In 9-10 and 10-11, when the cap was at 4.75, 2 years ago, our levy increase was 1.22%. And last year, or the current year, at 4.5% cap, we were at 1.54. Levy growths of the 1 to 1.5% are still difficult for us to be able to accomplish based on economic conditions that exist. In developing the pro forma budget for this evening, the municipal budget was considerations looked at no increases in service levels over what was in the existing year. The pro forma also includes a 2.25% salary increase plus applicable step increases. This is the third year of the labor contracts that are in place for the police department, the emergency medical services, Council 94 for public works, police dispatchers. We do not have a contract complete at this point with the NEA, which is for office workers within the town hall. However, the same consideration of the 2.25% was considered. A 15% increase in healthcare transfer to the healthcare reserve fund. We have netted that to 10% in terms of appropriation increase requirements based on increasing co-pays from the employee groups based on those labor contracts, and I'll go into those labor contracts shortly. We're also anticipating a $275,000 increase associated with municipal retirement cost based on increased percent increases associated with the municipal retirement system. I'll also provide greater detail on that in a few minutes. The municipal and school debt service is slated to go down by $293,000. This is part of a continuing effort that began 2 years ago with us reducing our debt burden as a means of reducing the amount of property taxes necessary to be raised on an annual basis to service debt both at the school level and at the municipal level. We're also anticipating an $18,000 increase in the capital budget, which is the first year funding of the pay-as-you-go portion of the capital improvement program, which becomes resident to the 2011-2012 year. We're also anticipating no increase in the property tax transfer to the school fund. The revenue statement within the pro forma budget, we are anticipating that there will be no changes in the motor vehicle reimbursement program and that the state's level of support will continue at the $500 per vehicle level. That would translate into a revenue income of about $161,000 if the taxable roll for motor vehicles stayed at the current taxable level as we saw in the 2010-11 year. I will also be preparing to increase the exemption from $500 to $3,000 per vehicle, which would be the midpoint between the $6,000 that was enjoyed 2 years ago to the $500 level that was established in the development of the 10-11 year budget. We anticipate that we will continue to appropriate $1.2 million from the undesignated fund balance. I'll explain that as we go forward. I also anticipate other fund transfers that we will see a reduction of $167,500, and I'll give you a chart on that momentarily. We also expect that the taxable property roll at the time the pro forma was developed would be increasing by 75 basis points, or less than 1%. That would yield about $32 million in new taxable property, which would generate, without any tax increase, a levy increase of $450,000. Having received the taxable property roll increases through the month of November, when the manager's budget comes out, that amount is going to have to be dropped. We're probably looking at a 0.5 or a 0.4 because we have seen a remarkable reduction in construction within the community, which will therefore reduce the new taxable property that would be added to the roll in the 11-12 year. But at the time the pro forma was developed, we were looking at the 0.75%. So when we look at the pro forma budget, we're looking at a program that would see about a $609,000 increase over the current year. As you can see, the operating budget is looking at an $885,000 increase, or 4.6% on the municipal program. That's really centered on 3 line items. One would be the retirement cost that I mentioned earlier at about $270,000. 2 would be around for health care transfer of about $300,000. And the police department budget based on steps necessary for, I believe, eight patrol officers, plus the 2.25% in the police department would yield about a $200,000 increase. So all in all, those 3 items alone would total about $770,000 of that $885,000 increase. Again, I mentioned the capital budget would be up $18,000, and the debt service, both municipal and school, would be down about $295,000. Again, we're showing the school program with the transfer equal to the $47,909,000 that it has been since the 9-10 year. The revenue statement, as I had mentioned earlier, the other fund transfers are down $167,000. That is principally related to development in the community. The open space or real estate transfer tax will have to be reduced from its annual income, which was at a level of around 350,000 will be down to about $125,000 in loss. We're also seeing education impact fees down $10,000, and the South Road School transfer, because there's less money that would be necessary to pay debt service there, down by about $31,000. So that's where we come up with the loss on the other fund transfers. We're also anticipating a reduction in prior year tax and penalty availability. That's good news. The good news is that we've collected more as current year taxes, so there's less available to collect as a prior year tax. But in the development of the 11-12 year budget, we will see about $70,000 less. All of these numbers will be updated prior to my budget submission to the council for March 1st. If the performer were to go forward, it would be looking at a property tax levy increase of around $700,000. That $700,000 is the $609 that's necessary to support the overall performer budget, as well as an increase in the overlay that would be necessary based on the levy increase. So it would be a 1.07% increase if the budget came out as has been prepared during the early part of December. When I look at the 11-12 year tax distribution, the performer budget would require an increase of 29 cents per thousand on the real estate roll, going from $14.19 up to $14.48. Again, these are nothing more than forecast at these points. At this point, this is if that budget, based on the parameters that I've spelled out, were to be incorporated. Any changes in that will have adjustments within the program. One of the major reasons that you will be looking at a 29-cent increase, even though there's a 1% increase in the levy amount, is based on the anticipated revision on motor vehicles. And I'll get to that in one moment. The performer budget shows that we have a $73.4 million expenditure next year, of which almost 69% would be school-related, which is for their debt service and for the property tax transfer to support operations of the school, and 31% for the municipal. When we look at the municipal budget, we're looking at 88.5% of the budget being generated out of property taxes. This is a very, very high amount in terms of what local share requirements will be for the budget year. Property tax levy, 23.4% would stay with the municipal side of the budget, with almost 77% going to support education function. The municipal components, almost 89% for operations, and I won't go through the rest. As far as the school transfer is concerned, the transfer itself to the schools would be about 94% of the total $50,800,000 that would be going. I mentioned the property tax roll. Before we get into next year's roll, I wanted people to get a better understanding of what happened in the, in the current year, the 10-11 year. This chart shows what the tax roll was in 2009, 2010, as well as 2010, 2011. And I think what's important to look at is that in 9-10, we generated about $54.2 million from residential base. That dropped to $52.5 million in the 10-11 year. That was because of the revaluation, and you can also see that the commercials picked up about almost $400,000 in taxes, while the residentials were dropping $2 million. So there was a substantial change in the manner in which tax burden affected different property classes. So we went from 84% coming from residential, down to 80%, but we went from 11.7 up to 12.2 on the commercials. Probably the most telling change between the 2 years was in motor vehicles. Motor vehicles represented 2.9% of the roll in 2009-2010 year, and that jumped to 6.3% in the 10-11 year because of the loss of the state aid on the motor vehicle reimbursement program, and because the budgetary decisions that were made to take it at $500 meant that we were really doubling the amount of taxes that were paid within the community, motor vehicle based. With a change that we make to $3,000 per vehicle exemption, that will drop that $4.1 million if in fact the roll is equal to what it was in the current year. But this is a very telling chart because it shows how revaluation does affect the community and also provides some information as to why we attempted to keep the motor vehicle at the $500. We need to trend away from that, will be my recommendation, in the 11-12 year when we try to meet the midpoint between the $0 and the $6,000 that we had in the 9-10 year. The property tax roll projection, as I mentioned, we're talking about a 0.75% increase or $32 million. To date, I've only got $13.5 million in new property tax, taxable property in the community as of November. That $13.5 million may in fact increase somewhat, but I think it's probably going to be closer to $22 million, so we'll probably lose about $10 million of what was anticipated when this forecast was initially made. The bottom of this chart is important because the bottom of this chart shows the differential. As I said, the performer would require a budget tax rate of $14.48. That would be up from the $14.19 with a $3,000 exemption. If the $500 exemption were maintained, as it was in the current year, that rate would drop from the $14.48 down to $14.24. So the change of going from $500 to $3,000 will mean that real estate will pick up a 24-cent increase. If we were to take it up to the total $6,000 exemption that had been enjoyed when we were receiving full support from the state on the motor vehicle tax reimbursement program, it would mean that that the rate, instead of being $14.48, would have to be at $14.70. I present this because we're not reducing tax levy when we deal with the motor vehicle exemption. What we're doing is assigning where the levy will be generated from, which class of property, whether it's the residential base, commercial base, or whether it's coming out of the motor vehicles itself. As you can see, by going from the $3,000 exemption, what we're really doing is taking $1 million and putting that onto the real estate roll. So I want to make that clear. That will be a council policy decision to make, but the performer is based on a midpoint at $3,000. The next chart looks at the taxable property base over the last several years. This is an important chart in terms of budget trend. As you can see, back in 2005, we had $4 billion roll. That went up by almost $180 million for going up to the 6 year. Then we hit our crest at $5.2 billion in the fiscal 7-8 year. I'm sorry, the 5.28 in the 9 year. Last year, with the revaluation and the reduction of the 17%, what we saw is that that roll dropped down to the $4.546 billion. So now what we're looking at is next year that 4.5 billion will increase probably by no more than $20 to $25 million. What's important on this chart is that when we get to the state education aid formula, the state appears, and I say appears because we haven't seen final documentation from them, but appears to be using the 2008-2009 year as the base year to look at community ability to generate taxes. That does not bode well for us based on the fact that we've seen the 17% reduction. It's a double whammy because it means that in the 12-13 year, if they use those reference years as we expect, we would be at the $5,281 million role that they would be isolating for developing the aid to education formula. We would see relief in the 13-14 year, but still that's 2 years away. So I think that it's going to be important for us to get verification on what the final reference year will be used by the state in terms of the determination of their numbers for education aid formula as we go forward. Again, we anticipate that if it's either the 8-year or the 9-year, it will not bode well for South Kingstown, and we will see a substantial reduction required in the level of aid provided to the school system. The next chart I won't spend much time on is the debt service. Again, what we're saying is debt service will be down a penny when we consider the third-party revenues that come in to offset the cost of debt service. Net property tax requirements will be about $2.5 million, $2,578,000 next year. That's part of the pro forma. This is one of the numbers that won't change. Moving on, probably the item which has created the greatest difficulty for the community and all communities in moving forward has been the municipal relationship with state government. This chart documents the reduction in state aid over the past several years. And as you move through this chart, you can see in 08, we lost about $158,000. Following year, we lost $480. Following year, we lost $661. And in the budgeted 11 year, we lost the $1,884,000. Because the state agreed to give $161,000 at the $500 level for the motor vehicles, we're anticipating $161,000 in receipts that weren't budgeted. So even if we look at what the estimate is for the 2011 year, we'd be losing $1.7 million from the prior year. When we look, the cumulative impact is a $3.3 million loss over a 5-year period and $2.4 million in state aid loss over the last 2 years. I think it's important to note that when we look across the nation, local revenues for municipal government, property tax is equal to 27.6%. In Rhode Island, it's 52%. In South Kingstown, it's 88.5%. So you can see that why there has to be so much effort to restrain any future growth within the tax levy. Give you another statistic. The average home property tax nationwide in 2008 was $3,534. Rhode Island is 86% higher. I'm sorry, that was the, in Rhode Island it's $3,534. State, nationwide it was $1,897. We're the 7th highest in the nation as far as the property tax on a per home basis. So there can't be additional yield out of that tax base without having adverse impact on our taxpayers. This chart on the next page just provides a graphic as to what the impact of state aid has been on the municipal budget. And again, this doesn't take into consideration what's happened on the school side or what will continue to happen on the school side. And again, as you can see in the budgeted 2011 column, when you look at the cumulative loss in state aid since 2007, you've got it equals to over 17% of what the municipal operating budget is. So you can understand why this is having impacts across the state based on the actions that the state has had to take. When we look at the 6-year history of the municipal budget and the transfers to the school fund, you can see that in 05-06, before the recession occurred, we were at about a 6.8% increase. While the budget was going up 6.8%, the levy was not going up, it was going up 5.5. Next year, we were at 6.2. The reason that was possible is because we had new taxable property growth within the community that offset the increase in the larger budget. As you move forward over the last 2 years, the 9-10 year and 10-11 year, what we've seen is a reduction of 1.1% in the 9-10 year and a reduction of 0.9% in the 10-11 year. So essentially, the budget that we have in 10-11 is almost $2.5 million less than what we actually spent in the 8-9 year. We talk about the need to restrain increases in property taxation. And this chart is one that I've taken from my capital budget, which takes a look at the labor force unemployment rates in South Kingstown. And you can see that unemployment in South Kingstown, and this isn't the state, but this is South Kingstown specific, averaged between 3.5% and 4.4% between 2000 and 2007. 2008, the beginning of the recession, it jumped to 6.6. 2009, it jumped to 9.2%. As of September of 2010, it remains at 9.2%. The upper box, I think, provides a different perspective. The upper box shows the number of employed workers in the community, and those in the white or beige are the unemployed. And as you can see, we have far less employed people within the community. What we're seeing is that as we go forward, there's less people employed, and we're seeing more people that are unemployed that are looking for work. And that's a distinction that needs to be made, because when we deal with unemployed workers under this reporting system, it is those people that are gainfully looking for work and are collecting unemployment benefit. If they are not collecting the benefit, or if they're underemployed, they're not going to show up on these charts. So again, it is a difficult time in the state. It's a difficult time in our community for people to be able to make ends meet. In many cases where we had 2 individuals working, we now have 1. In some cases where we had 2 full-time, we've got part-time people that are employed. So the earning appears to be going down, even though the state, when they look at the education aid formula, will be using data from 2 years ago, where we were still seeing an increase in the value of median family income. Capital budget, I won't spend any time on this. We'll be doing that in early January. Overall, we're looking at a capital budget that we'll see about an $18,000 increase on the general fund. One area that I think the school department will need to have some careful review is that the current year capital program is at $110,000. The forecast for what was proposed by the school committee for incorporation into the CIP was $270,000 or $160,000 worth of an increase. I think that's going to have to be looked at when the balancing of the school budget comes under review. I mentioned earlier labor contracts. I want to make sure that it's clear what's in the budget and why it's in the budget. The town has 4 labor contracts, 3 of which have been in place since the 2009-2010 year. 2009-2010, EMS, Police, Council 94, and non-organized took a 0 increase. NEA is still under negotiation. Obviously, they did not receive any increase because the contract was not settled. 10-11, current year, each of the labor groups have received a 2.25% increase. NEA has still received no increase because there's an unsettled contract. For the 11-12 year, we're looking at, again, the 2.25 across the board. NEA is still open. The other thing that I wanted to present in this chart is the issue of health care and retirement. Health care and retirement, note number 1, is related to EMS. At the time of retirement, they're entitled to, if they have 20 years of service, they get a stipend of $1,333 for 3 years, and so forth. 25 years, they'd get $2,666 or $4,000 after 30 years. Note number 2 deals with Council 94. Contract was amended for the 9-10 year, actually the 2006 year, where coverage was provided regardless of the retirement age up till age 65. That was changed, so anybody hired after 2005 would receive the same benefits as shown under note number 1, or the stipend for the 3-year period. Note number 3 is associated with the non-organized, again a stipend. Those hired prior to July 1st of 2006 and those hired after 2006 receive the stipend, and the differential is spelled out there. Police still have coverage through age 65 for health care. That has been incorporated into their contract since, I believe, the early 1980s. The next component of the labor contracts on the next sheet looks at the contract requirements as far as co-pay is concerned. I've got each of the groups listed again here, and as you can see, effective January 1 of 2012, all municipal employees will be at 15%. Those hired subsequent to August 1st of 2002 will be at the 20% in the EMS and police groupings. There's still work to be done, but remember this contract was negotiated for the 9-10 year, and what we're looking at is that with the next contract year, which will start with the 12-13 year, co-shares will be subjects of negotiation again. Retirement, I brought forward and said that we were looking at about a $270,000 increase next year, and that is because of the actuarially determined rates that are required for each of our employee groups. Police, we're seeing an increase going from 12.6% of salary to 16.03, or 3.4% increase. EMS is going from 3.28 to 4.67. And municipal employees, and this is inclusive of non-professionals within the school department, will go from 6.2 to 8.59. The projected costs that I've calculated at this point is around the $270,000 in increased costs for the 11-12 year. For the teacher retirement system, it'll be going from the school share. South Kingstown school share would go from 11.25 in the current year up to 13.39%. And Kristen will go over the budget implications associated with those rate changes. I think that it's also important, I've brought a chart in here, is that there's been much said about unfunded liability associated with retirement systems at the state level and at the municipal level. I want to make it clear that at the municipal level, if the municipality is resident to the Municipal Employees Retirement Program, contributions have been made on an actuarially sound basis. At this point, South Kingstown's three retirement programs have assets of $66.6 million with liabilities of $70.9 million. So at this point, our programs are 93.9% funded. That's down from 99% in the prior year, but a lot of that is based on market conditions, as everyone has seen, either with a 401, anything within the stock markets. The value of appreciation of the stock portfolios obviously has been down during the recessionary period. The bottom section of this chart shows the number of active employees in each of the groups, what the average age is, and services that they have, as well as their annualized salary. Next chart deals with undesignated fund balance. Question comes up on an annual basis as to the values that are here. As noted, when we go back to June of 2008, it was $9.9 million, or 13.4% of budget. That has been adjusted to the audit for the 9-10 year. We're down to $9,335,000, or 12.7% of the adopted 2010-2011 budget. We have incorporated into the 2010-2011 budget an appropriation of $1.2 million from undesignated funds as a means of paying down property tax requirements. We anticipate that if we anticipate that the fund balance will be around 12.7%, and when we finish the 10-11 year, the year that we're currently in, that could drop to 8.33 or 11.2%. I've used a placeholder of a $250,000 surplus. I want to make it clear, our objective in terms of managing any municipal budget is to spend as few dollars as possible while meeting what service requirements are. If we can reduce program, we will, in an effort to increase that operating surplus. In many places, people will attempt to spend all of the money that's been appropriated because if they, it's use it or lose it. We don't agree with that principle. Our objective would be if we can cut back, we will cut back if we can continue to maintain services. In so doing, if we can increase that operating surplus, it will minimize the impact or reduction in the undesignated fund balance. I pointed out in the capital budget document that the most recent publication through municipal finance offices indicates that a municipality should be holding a minimum of 3 months operational expenses in fund balance, which would be approximately 17%, about 17%. This is what has been recommended as far as really the chief financial officers in terms of coming up with budgetary policy recommendations. We're well below that amount, and we need to maintain a healthy fund balance for several purposes. One, for bonding purposes, so that we don't see diminishment in our bond rating. Our bond rating is the highest in the state. There's only 4 communities with a AA1 rating. South Kingstown is one of those. That means that when we borrow money, we pay less because our risk is, the risk is less to the investor. Those dollars are also necessary to be able to address extraordinary expenses. As the council will recall, $1 million was taken out of fund balance several years ago to pay toward the Superfund program and the cost of remediation at the Rose Hill landfill. As we move forward, there may be additional one-time expenses that will be necessary that will encumber funds held in that undesignated fund balance. The next chart just provides a review as to what undesignated fund balance is since the 2001-2002 year and what its relationship was to the overall size of the municipal budget. So what we're looking at there is the percent of budget. As I noted, we're now well below the 12%. We had been up closer to 14% when we go back to the 6-7 year. That concludes the documentation that I wanted to present tonight. I'd be glad to answer any questions that council or public has relative to the data that's been presented. I can take those questions now or wait until Kristen finishes her presentation.
We have questions here at the table. Dr. Mega.
Thanks, Ella. Steve, I just want to go through a few questions that I have on several of the slides.
Which slide was it, Tony?
I'm going to go to first slide number 10, where you gave your pro forma budget development. Your last bullet point spoke of a taxable property roll increase of 0.75% or 32 million, where you project you're going to adjust that downwards to zero. At
this point, I will have numbers through January. I'm assuming at this point it's probably going to be closer to the 20 to 22 million.
And I know these numbers are there in your other slides in the context if I went and did the mathematics now, but can you give me a comparative of where that was in say 07, 08?
If you take a look at slide 16, growth was 0.96 in the 8-9 year and 1.2 in the 9-10 year. And obviously we can't look at the 10-11 year. I've got the history going back. During good economic times, we were seeing growth in the 1 to 1.5.
Thanks, I understand that now. Bear with me. In regards to the, and this is no particular slide, in regards to the state funding formula and the use of data at a point where we were experiencing substantially better economic times, that goes by the assumption, first of all, that what is determined by that funding formula can be funded by the state in the context that as they are deriving our funding based on the earlier years, say 08, 09, they are not comparing us to the remainder of the state. They are just plugging our numbers within a formula.
No, what they're doing is they're comparing, everything is relative to a base year. So if they're looking at the 2007, the December 31st of 2007 tax roll, they're looking at South Kingstown's 2007 tax roll. They're looking at Smithfield's tax roll for 2007. Where the difference would be is where people are with revaluation. That would make a difference. But again, it only makes a difference every third year. From the state's perspective, it balances out. But everything is relative with the formula. If they're going to use December 31 of 2007, for us, they're using it for all of the other school districts as well. Same thing with median family income. Whatever they determine the reference year to be, it will be that reference year for each of the communities. So you can't, it's not a case where we can pick what the reference year is going to be. And with all due respect to the state, I think that they have to deal with a reference year that they've got solid information for. And if they don't have the information from last year that they feel is solid information from each of the communities, that's why they would be backing up to December 31st of 2007. Would I like them to use December 31st of 2009? Obviously, the answer would be yes. And their answer to you would be, yes, we will use that 2 years from now. And at that time, you'll reap whatever benefit you can from that. Remember, the funding formula has many different variables to it, but the funding formula is also based on 4 different points of data that are relative to a specific date, but it's the same for each of the communities. That's not going to change.
So the impact on us, because now it's obviously a comparison of us to other communities, is where other communities are within the reevaluation cycle?
That's one component. Remember too, Tony, that one of the things that they've done is that if they implemented the funding formula, we would lose about $3.3 million. They're trending that over a 10-year period. So they're looking at it saying, you're really losing $330,000 a year. So even if we're using reference years that are deleterious to your purpose and advantageous to another community's purpose, you're only having 10% of the overall impact. I sound like I'm defending the formula. I'm not.
I know you.
Well, what I'm saying to you is that from a mathematical standpoint, the full impact, if they were implementing the whole thing in 1 year, you'd have an argument. If they're implementing it over a multiple year, and in fact the changes made was that it would go out 10 years. But understand that because everything changes every single year, the number of students with on assisted lunch, the number of students that each of those different components change on a yearly basis. If you've got a declining enrollment, you're going to continue to see additional reductions over the base reduction of that 330,000. Just let me make one more point on education aid formula. We don't have any information today as to what they are actually going to use. They had originally said that in December they would have the numbers for the student counts. They would have the average daily attendance for October, I believe, of 2010. They would be using a median family income. They would be establishing the reference year for the tax roll. We haven't seen that at this point because obviously what I would like to do is to see the statewide numbers so that we can run our numbers and confirm that at least they have been accurately portrayed. But understand that there's really some major questions on how they implement that formula. Because if the formula takes additional dollars and they're dealing with a $300 million deficit, it could well be that they can do one or two things. They could reduce the amount per student that's going to be available, which would then increase the reduction that we would see. They could reduce that by 5% or 10%, or they could decide that they aren't going to implement the formula until they have adequate dollars and stay with the existing program of a base reference year and reducing it. At most, let's say that they were to take the $8.9 million you got this year and say we're going to not implement the formula, but we're going to take a 10% reduction. You'd still lose $890,000. Somewhere along the line, the state's going to have to come to grips with their expenditures to their revenues. And if the money's unavailable for the school's education funding formula, then how do you implement a formula if you're going to take the value per pupil, which is supposed to be the average of the 4 states, New England states, and then you're going to cut that down by another 5 or 10%, it becomes an unrealistic number. But if they don't have the dollars to do that, they either implement the formula with a discounted rate, or they don't implement the formula until they have the dollars in a future year. That's going to be General Assembly discussions probably up through July 1st, if not later.
And this is a statement for the benefit of the public, because as we were sitting here last year speaking about funding formulas and predicted that there would be very little there that was beneficial to South Kingstown other than perhaps budgetary certainty, we are also without that.
Absolutely. One of the things that makes this budget process, and again, process is more difficult, is that there, you know, in prior years in good economic times, you had a pretty good reference point as to where you were going to be with the state budget. Now it's a case where it's not just the state budget that we really have no idea where that's going to go. We also don't know if there's going to be changes made to retirement systems which would reduce the contribution rates that have been set in place today. So there's a number of things that can change and will be under discussion at the State House. And we're going to have to put expenditure budgets together and revenue budgets together, see where they differ and what the spread is between those two, and come up with avenues of reduction or other revenue increases, and be able to continue to adjust the budgets so that we end up with a balance at the end. So there's going to be sizable adjustments as we go forward. That's why I say tonight as a performer is a starting point. It's certainly not going to be the ending point of where we are.
Thank you, Tony. Any further questions here at the table? At this point, Steve, before Dr. Stringfellow starts, I would just like to take any questions from the floor, and you will also have the opportunity at the end to ask questions as well. So do we have any questions from the floor at this point? Could you come to the mic, please? Welcome, Bobby.
How you doing? Bob Traeger. I have several minor points and a couple major points, but I'll be brief if I can. I like the idea of inviting the public to get as much input as you can. I cannot come to every meeting, and neither can a lot of other people, but the town council has a pretty good sound system here. You can actually understand what's going on if you go on the computer and play back the podcast. The school committee, on the other hand, though, I don't know how much it would cost to upgrade that system, but that would really be beneficial, I think. I mean, I think we're in the, you'd be in the range of a few $1,000s, hopefully. But that being said, Steve said something, Mr. Alfred said something a couple weeks ago about state mandates. And there was a new one supposedly coming from DEM about cleaning up our ponds. I don't know, it's not a mandate yet, but he raised concerns about the level of mandates and who's going to pay for this. Well, which begs the question that I've wondered about for quite a while. Do we have a handle on, with the school budget and the municipal budget, what these mandates, all of them, add up to? And how much of it actually is funded? Because we use the term unfunded mandate all the time, but I don't really know how much money is actually, how many things are mandated and what that actually costs us. On the school side, I would imagine it's tremendous. On the municipal side, I really don't have any idea what the state mandates the town to do and what it actually costs us. And of course, the next question would be, if they're mandating us to do things that cost, $30 million and they're giving us 10, I think you were joking around when you said we've never thumbed our nose at the state and said we're not going to do it and come after us. But at some point, I think it would be nice to know what that level of money is so you could at least go to your representatives, a couple of them are here, and say, hey, listen, you guys are making us do this. it costs this amount of money and you're giving us nothing, or you're not giving us nearly enough. So I don't know if it's feasible to come up with those numbers from your office, like what the mandates are running us. Is that too much labor involved to come up with that kind of a round number?
Well, I think the other night we talked about specific items that we thought legislatively could be changed. There's really several different types of mandates. There's legislative mandates when we deal with the requirement for minimum staffing, let's say with the police or fire department. And then there's agency mandates when we're dealing with agencies like DEM, where DEM, working under federal mandate, is directing us to take actions. We said the other night, there's no specific dollar amount, because for me to be able to come up with a mandate cost, I'd have to be able to show what the problem is, how much it's going to cost to solve it. What I said the other night is that when we deal with total maximum daily allowances for our ponds, which is under the Clean Water Act, Federal Clean Water Act, what we're saying to you is it would be an ongoing process where we could make remediation today, not meet the federal standards, and then be required to continue additional remediation actions. So no, I can't give you exact numbers. What we said is that the initial program to deal with the TMDLs in South Kingstown could exceed $30 million, but that's based on a reiterative process of defining a problem, attempting to solve it, doing new testing, then having to set new standards.
Yes, that's a new problem, but the existing mandates, like for example, school bus monitors, school nurses having to be certified, you know, whatever you can come up with. I mean, you guys must have looked at some of those numbers and have some idea of what some of it adds up to. I think that it would be nice for the public to see at least some ballpark number of what the state is making us do. So, I mean, that's just a suggestion. I don't know if it's feasible to come up with that in a reasonable amount of time, but I just wanted to come up here and mention that. Thank you.
Bobby. Bob, just to respond, the school committee and the town council has had two sessions, individual sessions with our legislators, and they were very supportive with the total maximum daily loads that we have with the ponds, and we think that there will be a look at that at the General Assembly. And I know the school committee has also met with the legislators, and they were looking at mandates and possibly reviving some of the mandates that Westerly put out. So I think that's something that we are on top of, but thank you.
Doug Wardwell here, Dr. Wardwell. Just wanted to clarify, Mr. Alford, the NEA contract with municipal employees, which hasn't been consummated yet. Is that correct? The new contract has not been consummated.
That's correct.
And did I hear you say that you believe that we're looking at a 2.5% increase across the board? Are you looking at that as a possibility for the new contract?
I think, Doctor, if you look at all of the other contracts for the same term, you'd be looking at the same dollar amount, yes.
I see. Okay. Also, the present municipal employees' copay, I believe, is 10% at the present time. Is that correct?
I'll go back to the sheet. I've got so many different rates. It's what's that? Right now, for the NEA, it's at 7% for those prior to July 1, 2010. We're anticipating that it'll go up to 7, 10, and to 15% by January of 2012. That hasn't been negotiated in terms of settlement.
Okay. How does
My
that,
objective is to treat all municipal employees in a similar manner.
yeah. How does that compare, maybe Dr. Stringfellow or the business manager could answer this question, with the co-pays for the school employees?
Can you hear me? Okay.
The co-pays, the health co-pays for the school employees, you heard what Mr. Alfred said about
Did.
our municipal employees. I just wondered how that compared with the school employees.
Projecting for next year, all three of our collective bargaining agreements expire August 31st. And so we are negotiating all three for the projected budget year.
Okay, and what is the co-pay at the present time under the contract which is expiring?
They differ by each area. So for teachers, a copay of 3 to 6%. And then salary would be different by step levels. Salary copays are roughly in the last year were an average of 3%.
3%? Okay. The disparity between the two is very evident between what the copay is for the school teachers or the teachers in the system and the municipal employees in the system. That's what I'm...
Let me just indicate that I misspoke. NEA right now pays on a percentage base of their salary. So if anyone between 30 and 39,000 is paying 3%, anyone between 40 and 50. What I have here in the chart is what I believe is an appropriate level in any contract settlement that occurs. I'm not trying to negotiate a contract, away from the table, but for pro forma purposes, these were the rates that I would be using. It's also important to note that our contract negotiations began for the 2009-2010 year. The schools were 2 years ahead of that. So, our objective is that there needs to be increases on those co-pays for all employee groups, and certainly it's our belief that that the school department will be looking at their co-pays in the negotiation of the upcoming contract.
So they would be hopefully commensurate with each other. That's what I guess that's what I'm asking.
Since I'm not negotiating it, I can't.
You can't negotiate, but what you're hoping, what I'm talking as a taxpayer here, I would say, just let me clear that. As a taxpayer, I would like to see equality in the co-pays. If we're going to have one set of rules for the municipal employees and a different set of rules for the teachers, that's not equitable.
I think that
What's fair to me would be to say, and I know you're negotiating, the new contract is coming up, and I know you can't negotiate it, but I'm just trying to get parity here.
But see, I guess I don't agree with parity. I think what I would say to you is you need to look at the contract years that we're dealing with. We're looking at contract expirations as of June 30 of 2012 on the municipal side, where we're ending at 15%. Contracts that would be negotiated by the schools would go 3 years forward.
Yeah.
Parity, to me, means that you would like to see those contracts during their term end at 15%. What I'm suggesting is that there needs to be a look at those 2 future years, actually 3 future years, and determine where does the school committee want to be 3 years from now. It may not be the 15% lay. Just as when we negotiate the next contracts, we have to see increases in those co-pays as well. So I'm concerned with the word parity. I think it's more realistic to say there needs to be an appropriate level of co-pay. based on the contract year that's under consideration.
I guess the term parity is in question. I'm just asking for equality. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions before we turn it over to Dr. Stringfellow? Thank you. Thank you, Kristen.
Good evening. So this evening, I'd like to present the school department side of this general preliminary budget conversation. And we're going to begin with a slide that talks a little bit about what happened at the December 14th school committee meeting. We did have an opportunity to review the content of this presentation as an agenda item. We discussed presenting it in two parts, which is how I will proceed this evening. One is the state of the district with regard to student achievement. And I'll be presenting some data from InfoWorks that is found for everyone on the Rhode Island Department of Education website. And then I'm going to present general goals of our budget preparation. This information and PowerPoint slide is available to the public and is also posted on the town website and will be posted on the school department website for the public. So the first area is the state of the district with regard to student achievement, and I will let you know that as RIDE, the Rhode Island Department of Education numbers sometimes ebb and flow and don't reflect this actual most current year's information, so please pay attention to the dates as presented. We're going to talk briefly about demographics, taxing and spending as recorded per pupil through RIDE, achievement data, performance classifications, and disaggregation of data. The first slide talks about district demographics, and as you can see in chart number 1, we have remained relatively stable over the last 2 years in the area of racial and ethnic backgrounds. So you're looking at 3% African American, 2% Asian, 3% Hispanic, 4% Native American, and 88% white students in South Kingstown. Our eligibility for subsidized lunch programs has increased, unfortunately, and that's due to the economy, we would assume. So in 2009, we had 13% of our students eligible for free and reduced lunch, and now 16%. With regard to students receiving special education services, 18% in 2009, reduced to 16% in 2010, with 84% of our students not receiving, non-recipients, excuse me. ESL services, we continue to be what RIDE classifies as a low incidence population for English language learners. We have approximately 16 students out of 3,543 at the time who received ESL or ELL services. This slide is a new slide brought about by RIDE that I thought would be interesting to you because some of the questions we get during this budget time talk about property value and tax rates and our effort and capacity to tax. And as Mr. Alfred alluded to earlier, it's important that we have an idea of our district median family income as it does factor into the funding formula. So this slide from RIDE, and I'm going to do two disclaimers. It should read under district property value. That should say district property value per student. And so that's the amount of taxable property wealth available to the municipality per student, which is over $1 million. Which gives, and again, this is fiscal year 2008 data. We're hoping that with Race to the Top, a change in data warehouse for RIDE, that when we sit here next year and present this budget to you, it will be current. But it gives you an idea. So that equates to approximately taking your district tax rate per pupil of $11.97 in a per pupil expenditure for The school side, when it looked at in 2008, of approximately $15,000 per student. In a district property tax capacity of about $170 per student, and district tax effort of $72. And I defined what RIDE means as district tax effort. It's the extent to which a district is taxed in relation to the rest of the state. They take the property tax divided by the statewide average for all municipalities in the state and multiply it by 100. And then the district median family income, which at the time was about $67,900. And I tell you that because we have an accountability subcommittee, and one of the first tasks of our accountability subcommittee this year will be to take a look at our performance, but also how our cohorts match up in terms of ability to tax and median family income. So if you'll notice, I underlined sort of the outliers. We have a fairly large property tax base. Our tax rate, although is lower than an area, one of our cohort members, North Kingstown, but our per pupil expenditures are higher. That's been lowered in the last couple of years. And our tax capacity, Portsmouth seems to be the highest in our cohort. And tax effort means you have a tax capacity, but how much do you tax? Lincoln leads our cohort in that area. And in terms of median family income, although we have a high property values, we don't necessarily have the highest median family income. So it's my attempt to demonstrate that all communities are different, and that we all have different areas of ability to raise revenue, and we all have different areas of accountability. Now on to some of our accountability measures for students. Our graduation rate is increasing. Was 86% in 2009 and went to 86.8% in 2010. And this little circle graph will demonstrate that there are really 4 different indicators that the Rhode Island Department of Ed tracks. The first of which is a 4-year graduation rate. So it shows 86.8% of our youngsters graduate in 4 years. With the new graduation requirements, one of the mandates, some students need 5 years, and in this graph, they're counted as a dropout. So that's something to keep in mind. So we have 4-year graduates, which would be the 86.8%, dropped out, which would be the 7%, students who received their GEDs, which would be the 4%, and then still in school, youngsters who we're talking about 5th year in school would be about 3%. And to the right is the Rhode Island graduation rate. You can see that graduation rate in the rest of Rhode Island is around 75%, with the dropout being 14, the GED being 5, and still in school being 6. And if you take a look at our school department website, you can see that we have race to the top goals that are increasing in all of our areas, increasing student achievement, and certainly increasing our youngsters who are graduating, who are going on to higher education of some sort, and who will maintain their enrollment in higher education. Grade 11 NECAP data. You're noticing over a 3-year trend that our math scores, which is the first, I'm sorry that they're not different colors, they're different shades of blue. So the first blue box is your math score, and you're noticing a steady increase in math. Reading, increase, then remains stable. Writing, increasing steadily, and science, newly reported grade 11, 9-10 year. The table indicates our math SAT scores that were published in RIDE in 2008, shows the district at 548, 534, and 534 in math, reading, and writing, compared to the state at 489, 486, and 482, and the nation at 510, 496, and 487. Significant in writing. AP exams are always good news in South Kingstown. We're pretty happy to report the efforts of our high school youngsters in this area. We have 83 exams taken in South Kingstown in 08-09, 56 youngsters taking the exam, so you can assume that students are taking more than one AP exam. 72 scored at College Mastery, which gives you 87% significantly higher than the 58% that's seen by the rest of Rhode Island. I'm not going to go through specifically the learning and achievement accountability indicators, although this is some of my favorite information. I'm leaving it for the context of knowing that the last two bullets are really the most important. They show in our elementary cohort that we did meet our targets in the categories here are all students, ELA students and math students, and all of a sudden I just lost my coding. Students with disability, okay. And you're noticing that, I'm sorry, here's my coding. Groups, AS is all students. Students with disabilities is SD, and economically disadvantaged students, ED. We met our targets in elementary in all students, math and ELA. We met I'm sorry, I'm on elementary. We met for all students in math and ELA, and students with disabilities in math at the elementary level. Educationally disadvantaged students is an area we struggled in the last couple of years. We met our accountability indicators for RIDE in math and ELA, and our unmet targets were in the area of students with disabilities in ELA and math, an area of concentration that we have really targeted quite a bit of our ERA funds to professional development in programs such as Just Words and in Wilson Reading to make certain that, that youngsters are receiving the help that they need to close that gap. At the middle level, we met all our targets. And at the high school level, we met all our targets because largely that our other categories other than all students, we didn't have enough youngsters in the high school itself, fewer than 45 students to be able to measure the indicator. You'll find many single schools that will be the case. This is the disaggregation key, and you'll notice that it's similar, actually it's exact to last year. This slide was particularly interesting to Chairman Whaley last year, and so I included it again. And it's good news. Equity gaps are never good news, but we are making gains in our equity gap, and I'm very pleased about that. So just quickly, the keys are poverty, non-poverty. So when you look at area number one, I so want a little pointer, but when you look at the first area, the first bar, the brighter blue, is in math. The second bar is in ELA, poverty students compared to non-poverty. And you're seeing that an equity gap, as defined by the Rhode Island Department of Education, is a difference of 15 or more percentage points, plus or minus, in any one category. So when you take the math of students not in poverty compared to the math in poverty, and in the English language arts, we're looking at a 26 to 30% gap, which was formerly a 42 to 46% gap that we are beginning to close. With regard to ethnicity, you're going to see our all students versus our white students, because that's the only number that is statistically significant that we can compare. You're looking at an ethnicity gap between 12 and 33%, which was 42 to 44%. We have no gender gap between males and females in terms of our achievement data, and our disability gap between students with disabilities and students without disabilities was 57 to 63, and we're lowering it incrementally 55 to 59. Disability remains our largest achievement gap. That was part A. So that showed you the state of the district in terms of achievement. And the second part of my presentation will be the goals of the budget that will inform how we will fund our programs. I have the 2012 budget parameters, expenditure assumptions, revenue assumptions, pension rate, our district FTEs, federal grants, which is a new addition this year, charter enrollments, undesignated funds, our pay-as-you-go capital, a little bit of information as of last Thursday on the funding formula and our state aid trend. So with regard to the budget parameters, we're unsure if we'll be facing a mid-year budget reduction. We did meet with Carolyn Diaz of the Rhode Island Department of Education Finance Department on the 16th of December, and she's hopeful that there will not be a mid-year reduction, but certainly that remains uncertain. The biggest question on the table that we posed to our legislators last week is, will the funding formula be funded? We also know that our October statement projects a $222,000 surplus in the current year, which is good news. We always budget for a turnover allowance. This year we are estimating a lower turnover allowance as there are less staff members eligible to retire in our cohort. And as always, all open positions continue to be reviewed. So when someone takes a leave, when there's a need for a new staff member, we scrutinize them very, very carefully to make certain that they're required. Expenditure assumptions for the school department. As I mentioned earlier, all 3 current collective bargaining agreements are expiring August 31st, 2011, which will be after the budget adoption. And so certainly we can put our best foot forward in terms of what the school committee would negotiate, but it's important to recognize that the actual negotiations and the expiration of the contract will happen after we bring our budget forward to the council and beyond. We expect, as the town does, level staffing. That's our plan. And we are looking for a $300,000 turnover allowance. Formerly that was $500,000, but as I said earlier, we have less teachers and staff that are eligible to retire. Our materials allowance last year, as you might recall, we cut by 10%. That was very difficult for the schools. And so this year we are projecting to add back 3% off of the reduced amount, certainly not bringing them back up to where they were 2 years ago, but we are trying to give them an opportunity to make certain that they have textbooks in the schools and that they have paper and all of the cleaning supplies that they need. We are looking at an insurance utilities increase by about 5%, projecting same as last year. The same 5% increase, not the same increase. Healthcare increases, we're looking right now at a working rate increase of 5%. Certainly the copay conversation and in negotiations is something different than the working rate, and so that hasn't been determined yet. We are looking for an adjustment of 5% increase in rates for outside tuitions for students in special education. And we do know that Charahoe, the Career and Technical Center, and the charter schools will be funded through the funding formula, so that will be a per pupil expenditure, unless certainly it changes before July 1st. And our capital plan has been submitted. In terms of our revenue assumptions, as Mr. Alfred alluded to, state aid, this is the first year of the funding formula, and as of Thursday, RIDE is projecting that we had a change in what we can expect in South Kingstown, that we're looking at a minus $318,000 a year for 10 years. It was less than that previously, but they changed the base, and they are looking to change the references for median family income and for median family income, and what was the other piece that they were meaning to change? The tax base changes every year. They haven't established where they're going to get that from. But they made a commitment that they're going to provide the regents with more current numbers, and so hopefully that will be to our benefit, and hopefully that will happen. Additionally, they're looking to cut that they're looking to cut the funding formula by another 5%, which for us would mean a total of negative 738 potential reduction in state aid over what we had last year. And at the end, I have a slide that specifically shows you what we had last year and what we're looking to project this year. Again, it's a forecast. It's what the Rhode Island Department of Education is telling us right now. We have to budget in order to be safe. But we won't know that until probably the General Assembly meets or beyond, so probably up to and if not beyond July 1st. Our local revenues before this evening, that budgetary assumption has not been determined, but after participating in Mr. Alfred's discussion, I can see that it looks like a 0% increase in local revenues. Our undesignated fund balance, we're estimating 25% of the fund balance will be applied as revenue. Pension rate, we talked about a little earlier. It was 11.25% for certified pensions, and that was lowered as a result of pension reform. Rates this year have increased to 13.23, which would mean an additional expenditure of approximately $400,000 to $500,000. Non-certified pension was 6.20%. Rates have increased to 8.59, which would be an additional expenditure of approximately $40,000. This is how our pension has been trending. So you'll notice from 2003-4 year down to 11-12 that we've really, we increased substantially, peaked in the 9-10 years, went down due to pension reform, and then increased for this year. It had been a similar trend for the non-certified rate. And a sort of a pictorial graph that looks at the fact that it had one small dip for pension reform, and it seems to be trending upwards again. Our district FTEs are full-time equivalents. The net change from 2007 to 2011 in administrators were down 0.5. Total certified were down 32.7 FTEs. Non-certified were down 28.3 FTEs, and total FTEs from 2007 to 11 were down 61.5 staff members. And again, pictures that represent that trend. This is a new slide this year that was requested during the budget cycle last year. This gives you a sense of our federal grants current year 2010-11. In Title I, which by the federal government calls disadvantaged category of categorical funds, we receive about $307,000. Title II, which is teacher quality, about $205,000. Title IV, which is safe and drug-free schools, about $7,000. IDEA special education, $1.1 million. IDEA preschool, about $24,000. And then the three lower categories are ERA funds, which will disappear after this year. Title I ERA, $40,000. IDEA ERA, $459,000, and ERA preschool, $15,000. What are our federal grants going to look like for the 11-12 year? Our total projected is unknown. Typically, we write our CRP in the month of May, and right previous to May and April, we get a budget projection from RIDE based upon what the federal government is letting us know we should budget for, but that certainly changes over the summer when the federal budgets are enacted on July 1st. What we do know is that the ERA funds disappear entirely, and that's where you're going to see this year has been known as the funding cliff, 2012, largely due to the ERA funds disappearing. And then we went so far as to break down for Titles 1, 2, 4, IDEA, and preschool, not including ERA, approximately how much do we spend from those titles on salary, benefits, purchase services, supplies and equipment, and capital. And capital would be, in this case, hardware and software, usually for computers, largely coming out of IDEA monies. What do our charter school enrollments look like? They had been trending downward, largely as indicated by the efforts of the school department to add a full-day kindergarten program, which has really received more benefits even than charter school programs, as teachers in elementary school will let you know that our youngsters are certainly benefiting from having more time during the early school years. We did add 7 youngsters to our charter school enrollment. This year, 5 went to a new school that opened, a new charter school in Exeter, West Greenwich, on the Alton Jones campus called the Green School. It is a charter school for high school students. This slide shows you what our charter school enrollment has looked like. And the next slide is usually, piques a lot of curiosity and interest. This is our undesignated fund balance slide. And as you can see, we started on June 30th, 09 with a balance of $1.9 million, a surplus amount of $895,000. We applied $484,000 to the 10-11 operational budget. And then the auditors instructed us that there was a change in the 09-10 prepaid of about $2,000. Our undesignated funds for June 10th carried forward to $2.3 million. And we are anticipating applying, as I said earlier, about 25% of that as undesignated fund balance to the 11-12 operational budget in the amount of $587,000. Which would mean that if we forecasted our anticipated undesignated fund balance for June 2011 would be about $1.7 million. Clearly, before I heard the new auditing guidelines, I've always known 5 to 10% of your operating budget should certainly be in your undesignated fund category. For us, that'd be about 2.8 to 5.8 million, and clearly we're much below that. I'd like to now go back and calculate what 3 months of our operational budget would give, and I bet it's going to be more than that. So although this looks like a lot of money, clearly it should be bigger. Our pay-as-you-go capital, we had a cut in this area last year. So our original plan was a total of about $220,000. And John, why do I want to say that our final budget should have been 110? I'm looking at 100, but it's 110, right? Yeah. Excuse me, that's a change that we'll make. And we did project in that a need for $270,000 in this area, largely due to get us back on track to what our long-term capital planning really included. We understand that this will be a vulnerable category, but we don't want to let our technology lapse. We don't want to let our district projects lapse. And so we need to really, as a school committee, take a hard look at this area. And our last slide is our state aid trending. So the most important category is the bottom in pink, which shows you that for 2012, given the feedback from the Rhode Island Department of Education, we're looking at about $8,444,000, which is 14% of our budget, the lowest we've seen since before 1996. And as you can see on the bottom, we're really looking at $8,069,000 in state aid funding, and that was presented to us on the 16th of December. In addition to that, we're hoping to add the $375,000 that's outside the formula for group home aid. But as we explained to our legislators, and I see a few in the audience this evening, it's very important to South Kingstown that we get that group home aid. And so we're counting on that. And even in counting on that, you're seeing over $700,000 less in state aid than we received last year. And that concludes my presentation, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Stringfellow. The level of detail with both Steve Alford's presentation and Dr. Kristen Stringfellow's has been enormous, and it will help us better plan for the future. So thank you to both of you. At this point, I'm going to open with questions at the table. Jim, and then Polly.
Yeah, Kristen, just a couple of housekeeping questions. Page 10, pension rates. Boy, unless I've made some mistakes here, certified, I'm looking at about, 3.1 million now, 2%. I'm looking at about $620,000 you're going to need. And on non-certified, 2.39 times about 7.5 million, I'm looking at roughly $170,000 you need. Maybe Steve can tell me if I'm where I should be on that, or are these numbers something I wasn't expecting? Steve, you want to answer that now, or you want me to go to my other questions?
Your chart's showing what, between 4 and 500 and an additional 40 on the certified, right?
Right, correct.
And your question is, Jim, whether it's higher than that?
Yeah, it looks to me like a 2% difference here on certified, and I know this current year we're around 3.1 million of pension contributions, so that's in the area of 620,000. And the non-certified, the difference is about 2.39 times about a $7.5 million payroll, roughly 170,000. So where am I missing? What am I missing here?
We can certainly look into that from our perspective.
I think part of it, Jim, may be that the budget for what the school committee adopted was $3,225,000, where the final number, based on the adjustment that the General Assembly made last June, the projected expenditure is $3,035,000. So that's about $190,000 difference on the certified. I think that may bring you up to your amount. And
so 2% times that 600,000. All right, so 600 rather than 620. Okay.
So that's that. And then
Yep.
I would agree, probably on the non-certified, it looks like it's about a 38.5% increase. I have a number roughly of around 130,000 as far as what the increase would be for that.
All right. Yeah, I was using, as I said, a little over 7
You know,
million.
scratching numbers here.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm using over 7 million in payroll. Current year, I'm looking at about 7.3 million in payroll times 2.39, so it's 170,000. Anyway, 170 and 600 is 770,000. Kristen, versus maybe your two totaled roughly $500,000. So all of a sudden we have a big difference there, $270,000 difference. And that I know came from the treasurer's office. So I think my payroll numbers with you are correct. But I mean, that's not good news, but I mean, I just, as I said, housekeeping. And then another two quick questions here. Do you know where the federal grants were for the 9-10 year? We're roughly 2.2 million in the current year. Do you know where they were, 9-10? If you don't have them, that's fine. Okay, no, fine. And then lastly, your December 16th meeting, so your indications from the state are that you're looking at roughly 8% off, 8% down, not counting the group home, but from 9,182,000, 8,444,000. You're assuming an 8% reduction.
We're assuming this year that the funding formula was enacted. So we're assuming a $318,000 reduction for the funding formula. In addition to that, they're asking us to take another 5% off of our entire state aid.
All right, so you just put them together, 8%. Oh, okay, that's fine. All right, thank you. Thanks, Ella.
Do we have further questions here at the table? Polly, sorry.
That's correct. They are recorded by the Rhode Island Department of Education as a dropout. That's something that the commissioner is taking a look at going forward, but to date, that's how we've had to calculate it. Yeah, the 4-year graduation rate, the dropout rate, the GED, and the still in school. So if you add the still in school number, that's another 3%, would add to the 86.8, would be almost 90% of our youngsters would be, graduating. Certainly.
Yes. Thank you, Polly. Kathy?
Dr. Stringwell, I was also wondering, in regards to the special education component of the budget, how are we trending versus other schools that are like, I know it's comparing kind of apples and oranges, but just kind of giving us a heads up on what's happening with the special education budget. And I've seen that we dropped off on some of the FTEs. Are we seeing an increase in the FTEs in that particular, has it been a cutoff there or in
I don't
general
have that
education?
information for you this evening. I can certainly take a look at InfoWorks to see in terms of special education categories. To be honest, it won't be a true apples-to-apples comparison until the UCOA data comes out after January 1st.
Okay.
The point of the Universal Chart of Accounts would be so that school departments could learn best practice budgeting and instruction from each other in terms of accounting. So, for example, if you took a very high-achieving school in the area of reading and they had so many reading teachers and so many reading coaches and a certain class size, you could sort of extrapolate out that if you change some of your funding to look like theirs in terms of best practice, that would be headed in the correct direction. So I certainly could create something for you that could do a comparison, but I think that by the spring we'll all have that data available to us through the RIDE data dashboard. I will put a disclaimer on that certainly this is the first year that UCOA will be launched, and there will be some massaging of individual school districts to make certain that if we're doing an apples-to-apples comparison, that everybody is coding their accounting information in the same manner.
Okay, well, that would be interesting to see equal coding. Yeah, if we could keep a track on that, that's something that I have a particular interest in and I want to really kind of keep an eye on, definitely. And I have a follow-up question too. I know that you did some of the on the breakdown, you did kind of go over the middle school model kind of quickly. Well, the middle school numbers, I should say. I've lost it in my little tracking here. Oh, here it is. I was on
At
page
page
6. Yes. So the learning achievement in the middle school models, which is great to see, and that that you're happy with all the data. Would you attribute that to the team teaching model that the middle school is doing well?
It's really hard to attribute it to one particular area. You're looking at in this information lots of different things that would move together. It could be our middle school model, our professional development, the common planning time, the training that the teachers received, our class size. I think my response would be it's a compilation of everything.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Jim?
Yeah, Kristen, I was just looking at some older notes to follow up on Kathy's question. I know Bob Hicks last year, again, special ed, he was very pleased that things had fallen 23, 22, 20%, now to see a 16. But again, I certainly don't know how to measure apples and oranges here, but it seems like you made great progress in this area. But again, I can't measure this.
I was here last year, Mr. O'Neill,
No,
not Bob
I meant
Hicks,
in Bob
but-
Hicks last year.
Thank you.
Did I?
So yes, certainly within special education, our special education staff and our regular education staff have been working well to bring youngsters back from out of district into their neighborhood schools, and we're seeing a decrease in our out of district tuition rates. And as noted by an earlier slide, less students are eligible for special education measures. And so, although I can't tell you specific FTEs, I think we are trending well in that area.
Go ahead, Jim. And then we're going to go to Rick.
The free lunch, we've had a tough economy, but how is that measured again? Do home values, or is it employment, unemployment, income? How is that measured? Who are the kids that are eligible?
So it's typically two factors. So the Department of Human Services will notify us that youngsters are eligible, and also we do take a look at income. So free and reduced lunch applications will be sent to the home. If you have a Department of Human Services eligibility form, then that's what we take. If you're not eligible through DHS, then we take a look at income, and those are verified typically on your tax returns from the previous year. And there's Chartwells works with our food service department in order to make certain as many families who are eligible for this service take advantage. Years and years ago, there were less youngsters who felt comfortable coming forward. It's a very confidential system now, and so we try our best to make certain that families families who are in need get the correct paperwork, and we have our really wonderful social workers and psychologists and other staff members who help families through that process.
But going on to just look at that a little further, Steve's earlier chart showing the jump from 6.6% to 9.2% unemployment. Obviously, unemployment insurance would be a huge percentage reduction from normal income, so that in itself could have jumped this up, or do you have other parameters that come into play here?
I mean, certainly one of the variables will be if parents are unemployed and receiving benefits, or they're underemployed. I think Mr. Alford talked about the fact that at some point before the recession, there might have been two family members, two parents working, and now one parent could be working. And underemployed is really an area that we're seeing a lot of. We're also seeing families come back to live with grandparents, if you will, and they're not able to reside perhaps in a home on their own, and they're eligible, and we hope that they seek out our assistance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
When we look at the federal grants for the 10-11 year, what I'm trying to get a feeling for is, let's take IDEA, for example, which is pretty broad in terms of what it requires from a requirement perspective. We look at 1.1 million. How would that break out on a per pupil basis? And it may go, it's got me thinking more to Bob's question about how much of what we have to provide in terms of IDEA is really unfunded.
That's a bigger question than I'm going to be able to respond to.
Well, I know that, but I'm just conceptually.
So certainly there are, as Mr. Alfred said, there's state mandates and then there's federal mandates. And so certainly when you take a look at $1.1 million, does that totally cover our cost for all our special education students? Which, no. Am I able to take that number and add it to our total cost for special education youngsters divided by special education youngsters? I could, but as you know, special education youngsters, each youngster presents differently and might need different services. So we might have some youngsters who qualify just for, language and articulation support, and then other youngsters who could be on homebound instruction or out of district tuition. And so certainly that is a number that I can get for you, but I don't have it today.
That's fine. I mean, it was just in thinking about it conceptually, seems like a pretty low number in terms of what that legislation requires us to do. When I look at on page 12, is it safe to assume, well, the numbers seem to speak to, in terms of our FTEs, in the last 2 years being with 0% increase from the town over the last 2 years, and cuts from the state, which is, we've had similar discussion tonight. We basically, out of the total reduction in FTEs over the time period, almost 70% of those have come in the last 2 years. As you look forward into this year, do you see much more where we can go in terms of FTE as we?
Well, in certain categories, we've cut as far as we can go. And so other pieces are dictated by student need and by contractual requirements. And so as much as salary, when you bring down one FTE, you lose that salary amount, the ability for other post-employment benefits, the ability to grow in salary, and also that person's health care. There are just so many more areas that I can go to, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, but I guess as I look, if you look at the law of diminishing returns, the smaller you get, is it reasonable to think we can get another 20 positions, out of this? And we're going to have to talk, I guess, as a committee as to what our goals are going to be in setting the budget.
One of the pieces that I stressed last year when we were doing all of the difficult cuts that the school committee had to make is we will not be a better school department as a result of these cuts. We're cutting staff, we're cutting programs. It's very hard to continue to close equity gaps. It's very hard to continue to graduate more students. It would be a whole lot easier if we had extra programs. I can envision a whole bunch of very wonderful programs that are happening throughout the nation that I would like our students to enjoy. Every year being able to, as the town is doing, having level staffing makes it very difficult.
Kevin Jackson.
Kathy brought up an interesting point when it comes to special education costs, and I was thinking of a real-world example that just happened last week, and I'm curious I know how we accounted for it in the budget, but I'm curious if it accounts to some of her questions. We had a capacity issue with special education buses that required us to put on another lift bus to the cost of about $52,000, which we did do last week. We took that out of the transportation budget because we had some revenues there. If another city or town is taking that, say, out of special education budget, that would skew the number and make it apples and oranges. So I'm curious if the uniform chart of new uniform chart of accounts would accommodate that so we can compare apples to apples.
It would still be under transportation.
So in that particular case,
I mean, certainly if what Rick had asked for, if I was to take special needs requirements per pupil, operational, I'd have to look in every category. I couldn't just look in terms of special education teachers. I'd have to look in terms of transportation and computers and textbooks and teacher assistants. But that particular area, John and I believe, in each district would still come under UCOA if they did it correctly.
if they did it correctly.
Correct.
Okay.
Liz Morris.
Dr. Stringfellow, you had mentioned the impact of the new graduation requirements and the fact that kids were going to need to take 5 years to graduate. Do we have an idea of how many kids now are taking 5 years and what that might increase to? I realize we can probably absorb these kids, but I'm wondering if there's also going to be some mandates coming along to try and get these kids graduated within the 5-year. Will they have some kind of special education requirements at that point, or just to anticipate, because it could be?
So, very good question. At our January school committee meeting, I'm going to present some information about the new graduation requirements. I'm certain that you've been seeing a lot of press in this area. It was in the Providence Journal again this week. And right now we have I think it's about 3% of our youngsters are doing a 5th year. What ends up happening sometimes for youngsters, if they can't graduate in that 4-year time and they're now 18, 19-year-old students, then they sometimes feel a disincentive to go on to a 5th year and certainly a 6th year beyond that. And so what the charge will be for local school districts, for high schools to do, is to make certain that youngsters have sort of alternate pathways. So rather than special education, what I'm envisioning is that youngsters early on in their 9th and 10th grade years, or even as indicated in 8th grade, that we will need to provide some sort of alternative high school pathway for youngsters so that they can be more successful, so that they have more of a chance of graduating in that 4-year period of time, because they don't want to be 21 years old and still in high school, quite frankly. They want to move on with their lives. They want to graduate with their peers and cohort. And as 5 years becomes, as more youngsters are doing 5 years, that might not seem as difficult for them. But it's just like college. When I was in college, youngsters were doing it in 4 years, and now my children tell me that 4 years is unrealistic in terms of my expectation for them. So certainly we want to give children the chance that they need, the time that they need, but we want to make sure that they stay in school.
Ray Samosha.
I just wanted to ask about the slide with students with disabilities. I'm assuming that...
Can you reference me to just a page number?
Page 6.
Yep, okay.
So when I was visiting the schools, I'm assuming that we're talking about the classroom at Peacedale with students with severe and profound disabilities. Is that right? Is that
Are you,
the subcategory?
you're on page 6?
I'm on
page 6, this
page
doesn't
6.
deal with just
Unmet
students with
targets.
disabilities. Nope. So what's happening here, if you're referencing the top slide,
I am.
this is all elementary school targets that they meet, each of the 4 elementary schools.
Could you-
And bullet 1 would be, in order to make certain that schools make adequate yearly progress, they have to meet an elementary math target, an ELA target.
I think my confusion is, what could you classify what students with disabilities? What does that mean?
Any disability at all.
Okay.
From the articulation, speech and language.
Okay.
To learning
So it's not
disability.
severe and
not-
profound
certainly
disabilities.
not.
Okay.
They're included in the larger piece.
Gotcha.
But all students with an IEP would be considered a student with disability.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a few questions. Tony?
Would you prefer to ask yours first? I don't-
I'll wait, thanks.
Steve and Alan, I'd like to get your opinion on some of the InfoWorks data, either now or later, that looks at things like district tax effort. I always get concerned when hard numbers get attached without any clear information on what could skew those numbers in the context of how we should be looking at them. So when I see, for instance, district tax effort at $72 for SK, 78 for NK, 103 for Lincoln, does it state that we are not meeting our effort as compared to those districts that we select as our cohorts? If it is stating that, what could be the confounders that could place this as an erroneous number?
I'm not familiar with how they came up with these definitions. You know, I would want to take a look like at North Kingstown. If North Kingstown's reported as taxable property of 941 versus us at the 1.2, question that would be asked is the property exempt from taxation under payments in lieu of taxes for Quonset? And is that Quonset money taken into consideration as far as what cash value is? I would not know how they came up with these numbers, or whether or not we were comparing apples to apples as far as tax rolls are concerned. The tax effort and capacity, I'm not sure. I don't think those are dollars. I think those are percentage. And what they're saying is that where our tax effort is only 72% of what the state median would be. I'm not sure what their definitions are. I'd have to read the definitions. And again, I don't accept data unless I'm able to look at the entire state data to see whether or not there really is an apples to an apples comparison. But I don't know how the state puts this information out.
Thank you. I just had a few questions on talking about special education, and you may not have this information tonight. It's nice to see that the special education pupil presentation here is down to 16%. And I'm sure that some of that is attributed to some response to intervention initiatives. And I know that as a district, there was a waiver. So is response to intervention starting this September, or is it next September with the waiver?
We actually have been continuing to do RTI. We asked for a waiver in terms of our requirement to use it as an eligibility requirement. And so in years previous, we used the discrepancy formula, where you take a look at your ability versus your IQ, and that discrepancy formula will make you eligible. But in order to make certain that we're collecting enough of the right data on youngsters to make them eligible or not, eligible, we took an extra year to be able to do that as an as-needed basis in schools that were ready to use that as the eligibility. That will start happening everywhere next year.
Okay, thank you. The amount, what is the dollar amount for the group home aid? I know that we have the legislators here, and what was the amount that we received this year? And again, if you don't have this at the table.
It's on your last slide. At the bottom of the state aid trend, $375,000 is what we would anticipate in group home aid. But thank you for underscoring that again. And that's based on a per bed allowance. So there have been changes in some bed allotments in the state. We've not been notified that ours has changed. On the 16th, other folks were notified that their bed allotment had changed.
Thank you. And in looking at special education with the 16%, do we have a percentage of students on IEPs that have reading goals?
I don't have that with me, but certainly I think I could get that to you.
Okay, thank you. And just 3 more questions here. How are we faring with the budget with our food service programs?
Our food service program contract is pretty wonderful. We don't have an ability to go in the red. And so you're not hearing me on a monthly basis come forward and say that we have to compensate for any lack of planning in the food service area. If you need more clarification, Mr. Rashat can certainly go into greater detail. But right now we currently have a very good contract. We chose not to go with the state contract. It was a very laborious negotiation during the end of Bob Hicks' tenure and the beginning of mine, but it's proved very fruitful for us as a community.
That's great, thank you. And then the last 2 questions were posed to me from community members. So the first one is the music programs at the high school. There was a concern brought to me that there may be a cut this year with some performance groups after school, so I didn't know if you wanted to clarify that, and I don't know.
If you could pose the exact question to me, I'd be happy to respond to you, but I don't, off the top of my head, know specifically what you're referring to.
Some classes like music theory or some of the performance groups, has there been a cut this year in the schedule with the high school?
If you're talking, when you say this year, when students in April make choices as to which courses they're going to enroll in the ensuing year, if there is a drop in enrollment, and I believe it was either a music theory or a music composition course during the last enrollment that didn't elicit enough interest among the students to warrant the running of the class. If that's what you're referring to, then that's correct.
That's probably the answer that
It's
this
not an
person.
after-school program. That was a during-the-school day program. So typically, April, students select courses. Then the guidance department goes through and schedules them. We see which courses are able to run. Then it goes through the conflict matrix. And then we determine, we send letters to families letting them know if their first choices have been honored.
Great. That clarifies that. Thank you. And then the last question, Kristen, is the group that people have applied for to be, and I'm not sure what the name of it is, but community members.
Strategic planning?
That's it. Is that been defined as a group that will help solicit feedback from the community in the development process, or the school committee has not really defined the role of that group yet?
We've had several conversations. It's been an agenda item at several meetings, and people have applied. We're looking at it in order to inform some community feedback for our long-range strategic planning. We have a professional development subcommittee meeting happening right after the holidays, where we'll further flesh that out.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Further questions here at the table? Jim?
Yeah, Kristen, again, house cleaning. How much staff involved with the kids at pre-K, the 90-some-odd kids at pre-K? What do you have for staff? 4, 5, 8,
In order to
10?
be, I'm not going to guess.
Okay.
In order to be exact, I'll certainly get that to you, because we have teachers, we have teacher assistants, a part-time assistant, a part-time director, a school nurse teacher, custodial staff. Ballpark?
But you or John don't have that number? Okay, if you'd get that to me. And the other question,
Pull up the teachers.
yeah, and the other question that I have, out of your teaching staff, how many have masters and above?
Again, we can get that to you.
Any more questions here at the table before I open questions to the floor? Okay, at this time, I'm going to open the mic for some questions.
Hi, Bob Traeger. Just one question about special ed. You know I brought it up a few times at previous meetings, and I think you unfairly characterized me as someone that wants to take money away from kids in need, but Mike, well, I won't get into that again, but in any event, I saw the numbers where you said it went from 18 to 16, and I asked you about the trending numbers, but that really wasn't what I was driving at when I asked you questions previously. I'm more concerned about what we're spending in that category, because we could drop from 18% to 16%, but we might be spending 30% of our budget on it. Do you have any hard numbers on that?
Mr. Traeger, remind me, didn't we send you something regarding this?
Yeah, that really didn't have much in it. That just gave me the same numbers you put up there, like it went from 18% to 16%. It showed that the trending numbers are fewer students percentage-wise, but didn't show anything on budgetary expenditures on special ed.
And so are you looking at operational budget? Or are you looking for federal funding numbers?
Out of every dollar in our budget, in our total school budget, how has that money trended over the last few years with special ed?
Right, I'm remembering now. So in order to come up with that, it's an answer that I think is very similar to Mr. Angeli's number. That's something we would have to put together for you. So we'd have to look at every part of our budget and pull out in transportation and teacher assistant where the special education
But wouldn't you agree that that's a more important number than the 18% to 16%?
It all depends on what you're looking to achieve, I guess.
Well, if more funds are going, if you have fewer special ed kids and the trend is to spend more on them, that means you're spending less on other kids. So that's my concern.
As I spoke about earlier, we could have 100 special education students who had very low need in terms of service hours and requirements. We could have one youngster or 2 or 3 youngsters that could be in very expensive out-of-district placements, and students with disabilities could move in at any moment. And so it wouldn't be a fair characterization, in my opinion, to be able to say, you know, how much are we spending? It's how many youngsters are becoming eligible for special education.
So you're saying that there's no way to do it? There's no way to figure out?
I didn't say there's no way to do it.
It would be too difficult?
It would be very difficult to do. It's not something that we have at our fingertips, and especially if you're looking to look backwards. I'd have to take the operational budgets previous and pull out what part of the transportation budget was for youngsters with disabilities, what part of textbooks, what part of each and every category.
Well, I simply ask it because just like any budget, you can't really improve on your expenditures until you know how you're spending the money. So if you really don't know how much money you're spending on special ed, I don't see how you can get a handle on it and deal with it.
Another piece will be, it will be become more obvious with the UCOA, every single category that we spend. And the universal charts of accounts, which we've been working on for the past couple of years, will go live to the public. It's expected sometime between January and June. And so that will be a time where we will be able to pull out bits of data, and it will be something that we're collecting right along.
Because as I've said in the past, because the Insight data is old now,
Correct.
4 years old? Yep. I forget. But according to that data, we spend more per student, counting all the special needs, than virtually any district in the state. I think there's 1 or 2 districts that are up there with us. And I asked at the time, why is that? Is it because we have more special needs kids, or is it because we go the extra mile? And, you know, I asked it a couple times over a course of 2 years. And once again, I'm harping on the special needs because it seems like an area of the budget that we don't have a good handle on, and we do spend a lot of money on it, and it has nothing to do with not wanting to spend money on special needs kids, because when I drive down Saugatucket Road to pick up my kid at school and I see the bus stop with the lift gate and the girl in the wheelchair, I feel proud to live in a community that helps those kids. So I'm not saying anything negative about it whatsoever, except for the fact that I'd like to know how we spend that money and how much of it, of the budget, we're spending on it. But I know you can't answer that tonight, but that's my concern.
Further questions?
I just have a couple of questions, Superintendent. Doug Wardwell. The graduation rate on page 4, 86.8%, 2010. I just wondered if you know those students that probably at 3/4 of the school year aren't going to be prospects for graduation. Do they have to wait for remediation, or do you remediate during the time that you identify the need?
We certainly remediate when we identify the needs. Sometimes those needs occur before they come to high school, to be honest. And we know that youngsters need support of a numeracy class or a literacy class. We have ramp-up classes to make certain that youngsters are having extra support in terms of their portfolio that is put together. So there's really a three-pronged process. It takes a look at coursework, and then the exhibition piece, which could be the portfolio or the final exams in our community. And it also takes a look at the NECAP scores. The NECAP scores, that third bundle, are getting much of the attention for the new graduation requirements. And we have programs in place through advisory, SK 101, numeracy, literacy, within classes, extra support and extra help for youngsters as soon as it's identified.
It's really ongoing.
It is ongoing, but as students get closer to graduation, so during their senior year, we're particularly focused to make certain how they're doing. Guidance counselors are at work tracking youngsters to make certain that we're giving them the extra support that they need.
And as to hopping on Mr. Traeger's question about the cost, I have the special education out-of-district transportation cost. I don't know if you have a figure for that. Out-of-district transportation costs for special ed.
Right now, the state takes over out-of-district special education. The state of Rhode Island provides that transportation service. We don't handle it locally. We do pay a certain fee.
The state provides it. We pay a fee to the state.
The state of Rhode Island provides the
That's
transportation.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
But we can get that fee to you, Dr. Wardwell.
That's all right. I don't really need it. I guess what I'm really perplexed, and I have been perplexed for a long time about this. I see a bus carrying one student out of district for special education instruction. I don't see that. I haven't seen that in South Kingston, but in Narragansett, I have seen it. And whether it is the state of Rhode Island or the district that's paying for it, that's the kind of question regarding expense that I would look at. That's all.
I can speak to the fact that South Kingstown participates in the state program for special education transportation out of district. Mr. Rashat and I just consulted briefly. We don't know that Narragansett provides that, feeds into the state system. That's something that you'd really need to ask Narragansett. We know we do.
But you do.
Correct.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Further questions from the floor?
Jonathan Daly LaBelle. I have, I guess, a few questions, but I don't think I'll be very long. I guess I've been hanging around for a little while now because the graduation rate, it seems like when I first started going to these meetings, the rate was low, you know, maybe in the mid-80s, you know, and then they seemed like they just adjusted the accounting, and all of a sudden it was at, you know, 94, 95%, and now we're back at, you know, 86, 87. I don't know if you know the answer, because I know this is your second year, but
I can answer it a little bit in terms of a state perspective. You're right. The Rhode Island Department of Education has been tracking over the last 10 years graduation data differently than they did 10 years ago. And so it would not be surprising to me that you had low graduation rates and then all of a sudden they were higher because you were looking at everybody that graduated. We have difficulty with youngsters that come to South Kingstown and then move out of town. Tracking those youngsters becomes our responsibility to make certain that they're located somewhere else in the state or they become a dropout on our roll. And so Mrs. Majika in the guidance office works extraordinarily hard to make sure we are having an accurate representation. But you're right. I think that they in the middle of that 10-year period, they changed the denominator and the variables on us, to be honest.
okay, so I mean,
That's statewide.
so do you think that it's been pretty consistent for the last 10 years then, or?
No, I would say that we have been accounting for it probably in the last 4 years, maybe 5 years, in a similar way.
Okay, so the
In
drop.
terms of taking a look at that 4-year cohort
Okay.
and everything else.
Okay, so so then meaning that the dropout rate has gone up.
The drop, correct.
Okay. And then that, you know, free and reduced lunch to people on that, that number going up, I'm assuming that that must have gone up the year before. It went from 13% to 16%. Was it, yeah, I don't need to know the number, but I'm assuming it was probably less than that the year previous.
I think we're trending upwards in line with the economy in terms of need.
Okay, so just as you're, you know, formulating your program and your budget, and I appreciate the discussion here tonight, you know, as you're thinking about the taxpayer, also think about the, you know, the kids. There's a lot more kids that, and I can imagine in this town, you know, viewed as being an affluent town, that 16% is probably a low number. So, you know, as you're putting everything together, you know, please make sure that support stay in place for all these children so they don't get lost. And, you know, I know there's a lot of pressure on you guys with test scores and stuff, but, you know, the kids, you know, they're not test scores, so just, I guess I'll just bring that forward. I guess on the bond rating, you know, because we do talk about that a lot and the undesignated funds, and everybody likes to dance around that, you know, both in the public and, you know, I don't mean dance in a bad way, it's just, it's always a good discussion point. I'm just wondering, you know, at what point, I don't know if I can ask the manager this question or not, but, you know, I guess I'm just wondering at what point that would actually become at risk of losing the AA1 rating. And I'm also just wondering if there's an associated cost between that AA1 and what the next rating level would be.
A bond rating isn't based solely on what the undesignated fund balance is. It's based on many factors, from community income, tax distribution, number of taxpayers, or percentage of the tax base with the top 10 taxpayers. It's a number of things. It is a beacon for review. What's also a beacon for review as far as bond ratings is major changes in the value of the undesignated fund balance over a multiple year period. From an accounting standpoint, if we spend and have a surplus of less than what the appropriation is for fund balance going into that budget, we've spent more money than we've actually generated. So they would be reporting anything where we have a surplus of less than $1.2 million as being an operating deficit from accounting standards. All of those different things are taken into consideration. It's a broad horizon. The last bond rating review probably took the finance director 6 hours on the phone, as well as probably 20 to 25 hours in terms of the financial data that had to be prepared. So it's a broad thing. If the suggestion is we can lose the value of the undesignated fund balance and spend it, the real problem is if you took more money into next year's budget, how do you replace that as a base revenue in the following year? All you're doing is what the state has done traditionally, which is to have one-time fixes for where there's a need to have controls over not spending more than you're able to generate in a given year. So, as I said earlier, we're looking at government finance officers' best practices recommendation for 3 months, which is 16.67% of the budget. If we were at that level, we'd be up at probably around $12.5 million. The forecast that we're looking at now puts us between 8.3 million and 9 million. So we're well below what best practice requirements would be. And if what we're going to do is to take the 1.2 and take it up to 1.5, are we suggesting that we're going to have a $1.5 million surplus? Because if we're not, 2 to 3 years from now, the fund balance becomes too low. And at that point, you do lose the bond rating. The other thing that you need to consider is that undesignated fund balance is invested. In good economic times, we've generated as much as $1.4 million in income that offsets property tax need. Take that amount down and let the markets go back to where they had been, and you're losing the potential for $400,000 or $500,000 a year. Do you want to do that in the short term at the expense of the long term? I can't recommend that professionally, and I won't.
Okay, just to clarify, I wasn't making a suggestion, just asking a question. Thank you.
I just want to add to what Steve said, and based on the numbers that we're projecting now, the fund balance has gone down from 9.95 down to 8.33. So we've lost 1.6 million over the last 3 years. So it is drawing down, and as Steve said, we have 1.2 million that we're putting back into the budget. If we don't generate that as a surplus, then each year that's going to go down. And based on the volatility in the revenue side right now, based on the economy, I think maintaining that fund balance at the level it's at now is what we need to do. I do want to clarify one thing on the bond rating. It's not A1, it's AA3.
Okay.
So that's one level below a AAA rating.
Okay, thank you. All right, and I guess at the school committee meeting, it was with the legislators there, it was discussed maybe bringing resolutions forward, and you know, based upon what you're hearing now, do you see the potential of bringing something forward that would include a hold harmless clause for, you know, communities that are losing money under the funding formula? And I guess I might, you know, just add to that, you know, where there's a, you know, community such as ours that is losing money, you know, whether or not there might be a different category, you know, that 5% reduction, you know, would it have to be across the board, or where if there's a community that's already losing money, could that be a lower tier of loss?
Jonathan, I think, you know, the school committee expressed its belief in that at the last meeting. There's no question about that. However, it has not yet met to discuss exactly what they might look like. So I would ask you just to hold that question, and I'll let Kristen answer the second half of you.
Thank you.
I actually asked that question of Carolyn Diaz, Jonathan.
Right. Thank you.
And so this was her response. It would not necessarily be 5 to 10% across the board. It could be worse than what I have described. Carolyn said RIDE would recommend, please don't take offense to this, I took offense to this, but districts who have been overfunded, that's where we would be, would decrease more rapidly. And districts who have been underfunded, most of the urbans, would increase more slowly.
I see. Okay. Interesting math.
Jonathan, could I follow up your question? Did she give you a definition of overfunded?
We are
underfunded. But
did definition.
But did they define what they were using as a definition?
So the folks, generally, the folks who increased with the funding formula had been underfunded, and folks who decreased with the funding formula have been overfunded. So Barrington has been underfunded. South Kingstown, in their definition, has been overfunded.
Okay, and I'm just going to clarify, that's coming from RIDE.
Correct.
That's not coming from the legislature.
Correct.
Okay.
So RIDE will make a recommendation to the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents, as I understand it, will endorse a certain piece of the funding formula. I'm hearing from RIDE that the Board of Regents will endorse fully funding the funding formula. How that will play out until July 1st, we don't know yet.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say again, you know, I really appreciate it. Very trying times, and you know, I'm not oblivious to that. I'm coming up trying to flesh out some things, and I'm hearing some good conversation, and I like the kind of the broad parameters that I'm hearing being discussed, because there's just so many different variables in play. So you know, I think keep it as broad as possible for as long as possible. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, at this time, I would, sorry. Thank you.
Hi, Roland Benjamin. I have a few questions, and I'm not necessarily looking for answers to them tonight. I'm hoping there's a lot of conversations that are going to happen over the next couple of months between contracts and executive session and that type of thing. What I did see was in different slides on the school budget about $1.8 million in a delta, whether that's either spending increases coming from pension contributions or revenue decreases based on potential funding formula hits, or the ERA funds going away. I saw that, one of them being the pension system. I want to just make the one comment on that. The benefit that it provides to the employees and the recipients that is nowhere near commensurate to the amount of money spent on that system. I look at a very simple, the idea that we're looking at about 30% of an employee's compensation going into the pension fund, whether that's coming from state, local, or their own paycheck. On a Step 10 teacher, that's a lot of money going in for over the course of their career, and in the end, they're left with a revenue stream that it's pretty decent by some standards, but they have nothing when they pass on, or when their spouse passes on. It's constantly under threat of reform, or whatever you want to call it, by Providence. Whether you're talking about cost of living adjustments, you're talking about retirement age changes, and probably most significantly, it's susceptible to changes, especially in a statewide system. We have a system that seems to have been funded pretty well on behalf of our employees and teachers and whatever. You look at another community, and we're basically depending on every other community to adequately fund their system. And if that system is at risk because other communities aren't funding it correctly, are we putting our own teachers at risk, our own town employees at risk, by pooling them into these systems where there's some high-risk communities there? So I think those points have to be there. And then I'd like to make one sort of comment that I guess I'd address it to just a comment that you made, and I know the Superintendent, that you talked about the idea that a lot of these impacts, these financial impacts, will not make us a better school system. And I understand that logic, but at one point, this is the top of our school system here, right here along this table. That is almost a cultural statement that will filter all the way down through the organization. I realize that there's funding challenges here, but those aren't insurmountable. And at one point, as a leadership group or whatever, you almost have to start the conversation by saying that we will be a better system, despite some of these challenges. And these are things that there may be some things that we have to overcome, but it doesn't start by saying we won't be a better system. So I think that's all I've got. I don't really have any questions that I'd like to have answered, but I just hope these are things that make it into a lot of these discussions going forward. Thanks.
Eller, if I could just clarify something with Roland. The teachers are part of a pooled system. South Kingstown teachers are in the same system as Narragansett or Barrington. When it comes to the municipal systems itself, the state retirement system operates the system on the town's behalf. The assets that I've listed up on the board, those belong to South Kingstown. So when it comes down to municipal employees, which is really the non-certified program at the school level, as well as the muni employees, EMS, and police, those assets belong to the town. Those liabilities are associated with the town. So those are not going to be affected by underfunding by other communities. In fact, it's illegal for a community not to meet the actuarially required contribution rate. That's why the MERS system is in as good a shape as it is, because the communities have been required to pay, plus the employees have paid each and every year. Now, in some of the years, you look at the liabilities there, that $4.3 million. Remember that for several years, municipal employers were paying zero, while the employees were paying their 7 to 9%. So I don't want to have people assuming that if the MERS system needed additional dollars, it could attach to our assets. They can't. They manage their portfolio, which is pooled. All the assets are pooled. They manage that on our behalf. And it's done in a very professional way. But no one can touch what our assets are any more than we can walk away from the liabilities that are there. But at a 94% funding rate, based on the conditions that we've been faced with over the past 3 years, you know, at one time we were funded at over 100 and I think it was 112%, 112% for each of our funds. So those assets are not in peril. The teachers are the only part of the pension system that are pooled resources with all of the other teachers statewide.
Do we have someone else?
I don't see anybody else, but I'm still taking questions.
Sure,
up here.
Jim. Yep.
I think what we've heard tonight, and Roland just confirmed it, and what Kristen has written into place here, and with the pension issues, we're starting this about $1.8 million in the hole. 800,000 pensions, 256,000 stimulus, 260. Now we're here tonight, 318,000 education funding formula, and 450,000 state aid cut. That's $1.8 million. And yet, as you mentioned in here, I think you meant here, expenditure assumptions level staffing. So we have a huge conflict even before we hit the elephant in the room, which is your negotiations of the contract. And you know where I stand on that. I think I'm demanding that you're going to be tough, because what happened 3 years ago, the folks got a waiver on the healthcare copay and a zero for dental. So I think that's of great concern. And I'm just looking at what you've done tonight, Kristen. We're $1.8 million in the hole, and yet this one comment of yours, level staffing, we're in conflict here. I just don't see the community ability at all to come up with more money on a property tax transfer, either for the town or the schools. So I think you're going to have to dig deep here, and dig very deep. Maybe you cut steps in half, eliminate buybacks. Have you talked about a couple towns in the state have done privatization of custodial services? I'd hate to see that, but it's happened in other towns who have a lot more of that wealth factor than we do. So nobody's talking about this. We're all, quietly walking around these issues, and it's going to come back to haunt us. And the other thing I hope our council does over the next month, personally, I hope you don't move forward with the lease of South Road School, because maybe you should be leasing part of Curtis Corner. You know I want Curtis Corner to close. You know I want South Road open. You know I want to go back to this elementary K through 6 system. But I think we need to talk about here at the council, these assets, these school assets belong to us. They're as much our responsibility as the school committees. And we should talk about what has happened in the last 10 years. We're 950 fewer kids. Holy cow, we're 5% more classrooms, and I can play with numbers all night long, teaching staff, everything else, but we need to have this conversation at the council level. And early in January, we need to know what the public and the taxpayers expect of us when it comes to our facilities and use of our facilities and our assets. And I think we should do that. We're the leaders of this community. We should have this conversation.
Jim, I think that it is our responsibility to look at the fiscal note, but I do not want to cross the line when it comes to, getting our nose stuck in the business of the school committee. I will reiterate that when I, as a citizen, have something to say, and school committee has seen me at many of their meetings, I do go and I voice my concerns. And I would encourage you to do that.
Is that a legal opinion that you're stating about the school assets not being our responsibility also?
No, that the fiducial responsibility is ours, but I think that we need to really walk that fine line with not doing the business of the school committee. So we can continue the dialogue.
I couldn't disagree more, but I'm happy to have the dialogue. But we should have the dialogue.
Absolutely. And maybe we do need to get a legal opinion on it. That may be something that we should bring to the table, so that maybe we can agree on that someday. Rick. Carol? Thank you, Rick.
I just want to say to Jim, before we attack what they're going to come up with, we obviously need to hear more from them. And this meeting is the first of several meetings that they'll have, several meetings that we will have. which I believe we end up all together once again, and we hear the different possibilities of what can be cut and what can't be cut, and how deep are we going to go with these things. And I think it's a very difficult job we all have ahead of us, and I don't think anybody at either table wants to go back to the taxpayer and with the 4.25% increase, because that's just not going to happen. I don't see that as a possibility this year. For if you come to us asking for that kind of increase, we're going to be very hard pressed to go to the property owners and ask them to pay it. So I just think it's a very difficult job we have, and hopefully we'll all work together and we'll find a solution that's good for the schools, good for the people.
Tony?
I think Roland left. I certainly appreciate his comments about being a better system in spite of issues, which certainly reaches a chord in me in regards to student achievement, because I think that's what Roland was referring to. Councilman O'Neill's suggestion about how schools could be structured could ultimately be one that we look at as valid based on student achievement. And if that's the case, then it's metametric. That's very important. But as a committee, I think we look at that outcome as one that's a priority. We would like to be able to turn to our taxpayers and say, you're making this investment, and as a result, you're getting the very best outcome you possibly can get in regards for your money. We certainly have been recognized as a district that values the quality of education, and so in order for us to continue to be looked at in that manner, that will have to remain as a priority as we make decision making.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. Seeing there's no further comments, I would personally like to thank the school committee and the town council. We will continue to work cooperatively and collaboratively together, and a most heartfelt thank to our administration, Steve Alford and Dr. Kristen Stringfellow and John Rashat and Alan Lord, for beginning this process. It is a long process, and this is a journey that, you know, we will partake together. We've engaged in a rich dialogue to start this journey, and I thank everyone. This is not an easy task. I think both sides needs to look at the revenue and the expenditures, and both of us need to figure out how we're going to fill that hole that we're going to come across, that void, and work together. So we look forward to the capital improvement budget hearings coming up in January 4th, 5th, and 11th, I believe. And I'd like to wish everybody a very, very happy holiday, and enjoy the time together with your families. Thank you.